Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gaylie Bell-Stewart. I'm the director of Tim O'Connor's Readers Theater, and today's stories are about family. We all have them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Families are where we came from. They're the source of our earliest memories, our joys, our sorrows. We developed our own families after we grew up, our spouses, our kids, our friends, our pets. Today's stories are about an unfaithful wife, a funny marriage proposal, a little girl and her grandmother, and a boy and his irresponsible dad. I'm sure you will find someone familiar in one or more of these stories. So I invite you to enjoy my little theater family's Readers Theater today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this one of our very last performances of our Readers Theater. My name is Jon Blinder, and I'm reading a story by Doris Lessing, written in 1948, called The Pig. The farmer paid his laborers on a Saturday evening when the sun went down. By the time he had finished, it was always quite dark, and from the kitchen door, where the lantern hung, bars of yellow light lay down the steps across the path and lit up the trees and the dark faces under them. This Saturday, instead of dispersing as usual when they took their money, they retired a little way into the dark under the foliage, talking among themselves to pass the time. When the last one had been paid, the farmer said, "Call the women and the children. Everybody in the compound must be here." The boss boy, who had been standing beside the table calling out names, stood forward and repeated the order, but in an indifferent voice, as a matter of form, for all this had happened before every year for years past. Already, there was a subdued moving at the back of the crowd as the women came in from under the trees where they had been waiting, and the light caught a bunched skirt, a copper armlet, or a bright headcloth. Now, all the dimly lit faces showed hope that soon this ritual would be over and they could get back to their huts and their fires. They crowded closer without being ordered. The farmer began to speak, thinking as he did of his lands that lay all about him, invisible in the darkness, but sending on the wind a faint rushing noise like the sea. And although he had done this before so often and was doing it now half cynically, knowing it was a waste of time, the memory of how good those fields of strong young plants looked when the sun shone on them put urgency and even anger into his voice. The trouble was that every year black hands stripped the cobs from the stems in the night, sacks of cobs, and he could never catch the thieves. Next morning, he would see the prints of bare feet in the dust between the rows. He had tried everything. He had warned, threatened, docked rations, even fined the whole compound collectively. It made no difference. The lands lying next to the compound would be cheated of their yield, and when the harvesters brought in their loads, everyone knew there would be less than what had been expected. And if everyone knew it, why put on this display for the 10th time? That was the question the farmer saw on their faces in front of him. Polite faces turning this way and that over impatient bodies and shifting feet. They were thinking only of the huts and the warm meal waiting for them. The philosophic politeness, almost condescension, with which he was being treated infuriated the farmer, and he stopped in the middle of a sentence, banging on the table with his fist so that the faces centered on him and the feet stilled. "Jonas," said the farmer. Out onto the lit space stepped a tall, elderly man with a mild face. But now he looked somber. The farmer saw that look and braced himself for a fight. This man had been on the farm for several years, an old scoundrel, the farmer called him, but affectionately. He was fond of him, for they had been together for so long. Jonas did odd jobs for half the year. He drew water for the garden, cured hides, cut grass. But when the growing season came, he was an important man. "Come here, Jonas," the farmer said again, and picked up the .33 caliber rifle that he had been leaning against his chair until now. During the rainy season, Jonas slept out his days in his hut and spent his nights till the cold dawns came guarding the fields from the buck and the pigs that attacked the young plants. They could lay waste whole acres in one night, a herd of pigs. He took the rifle, greeting it, familiar its weight on his arm. He looked reluctant, nevertheless. "This year, Jonas, you will shoot everything you see. You understand?" "Yes, boss." "Everything, buck, baboons, pig, and everything you hear. You will not stop to look. If you hear a noise, you will shoot." There was a movement among the listening people and soft protesting noises. "And if it turns out to be a human pig, then so much worse. My lands are no place for pigs of any kind." Jonas said nothing, but he turned towards the others, holding the rifle uncomfortably on his arm, appealing that they should not judge him. "You can go," said the farmer. After a moment, the space in front of him was empty, and he could hear the sound of bare feet feeling their way along dark paths, the sound of loudening, angry talk. Jonas remained beside him. "Well, Jonas, I do not want to shoot this year." The farmer waited for an explanation. He was not disturbed at the order he had given. In all the years he had worked this farm, no one had been shot, although every season the thieves moved at night along the mealy rows, and every night Jonas was out with a gun, for he would shout or fire the gun into the air to frighten intruders, and it was only when dawn came that he fired at something he could see. All this was a bluff. The threat might scare off a few of the more timid, but both sides knew, as usual, that it was a bluff. The cobs would disappear. Nothing could prevent it. "And why not?" asked the farmer at last. "It's my wife. I wanted to see you about it before," said Jonas in dialect. "Oh, your wife." The farmer had remembered. Jonas was old-fashioned. He had 2 wives, an old one who had borne him several children, and a young one that gave him a good deal of trouble. Last year, when this wife was new, he had not wanted to take on the job which meant being out all night. "And what is the matter with daytime?" the farmer asked, with waggish good humor, exactly as he had the year before. He got up and prepared to go inside. Jonas did not reply. He did not like being appointed official guardian against theft by his own people. But even that did not matter so much, for it never once occurred to him to take the order literally. This was only the last straw. He was getting on in years now, and he wanted to spend his nights in peace in his own hut instead of roaming the bush. He had disliked it very much last year, but now it was even worse. A younger man visited his pretty young wife when he was away. Once he had snatched up a stick in despair to beat her, then he had thrown it down. He was old, and the other man was young, and beating her could not cure his heartache. Once he had come up to his master to talk over the situation as man to man, but the farmer had refused to do anything. And indeed, what could he do? Now, repeating what he had said then, the farmer spoke from a kitchen steps, holding the lamp high in one hand over his shoulder as he turned to go in, so that it sent beams of light swinging across the bush. "I don't want to hear anything about your wife, Jonas. You should have looked after her yourself. And if you are not too old to take a young wife, then you aren't too old to shoot. You will take the gun as usual this year. Good night." And he went inside, leaving the garden black and pathless. Jonas stood quite still, waiting for his eyes to accustom themselves to the dark. Then he started off down the path, finding his way by the feel of the loose stones under his feet. He had not eaten, but when he came to within sight of the compound, he felt he could not go farther. He halted, looking at the little huts silhouetted black against cooking fires that sent up great drifting clouds of illuminated smoke. There was his hut. He could see it, a small conical shape. There his wives were, waiting with his food prepared and ready. But he did not want to eat. He felt he could not bear to go in and face his old wife, who mocked him with her tongue, and his young wife, who answered him submissively, but mocked him with her actions. He was sick and tormented, cut off from friends who were preparing for an evening by the fires, because he could see the knowledge of his betrayal in their eyes. The cold pain of jealousy that had been gnawing at him for so long felt now like an old wound, aching as an old wound aches before the rains set in. He did not want to go into the fields, either to perch until he was stiff in one of the little cabins on high stilts that were built at the corners of each land as shooting platforms, or to walk in the dark through hostile bush. But that night, without going for his food, he set off as usual on his long vigil. The next night, however, he did not go, nor the next nights following. He lay all day dozing in the sun on his blanket, turning himself over and over in the sun as if its rays could cauterize the ache from his heart. When evening came, he ate his meal early before going off with the gun. And then he stood with his back to a tree, within sight of the compound, indeed, within a stone's throw of his own hut, for hours, watching silently. He felt numb and heavy. He was there without purpose. It was as if his legs had refused an order to march away from the place. All that week, the lands lay unguarded. And if the wild animals were raiding the young plants, he did not care. He seemed to exist only in order to stand at night watching his hut. He did not allow himself to think of what was happening inside. He merely watched until the fires burned down and the bush grew cold, and he was so stiff that when he went home at sunrise, he had the appearance of one exhausted after a night's walking. The following Saturday, there was a beer drink. He could have got leave to attend it had he wanted, but at sundown, he took himself off as usual and saw that his wife was pleased when he left. As he leaned his back to the tree trunk that gave him his support each night and held the rifle lengthwise to his chest, he fixed his eyes steadily on the dark shape that was his hut and remembered that look on his young wife's face. He allowed himself to think steadily of it and of many similar things, and he remembered the young man as he had seen him only a few days before, bending over the girl as she knelt to grind meal, laughing with her, and the way they both looked up, startled as his approach, their faces growing blank. He could feel his muscles tautening against the rifle as he pictured that scene, so that he set it down on the ground for relief, letting his arms fall. But in spite of the pain, he continued to think, for tonight, things were changed in him, and he no longer felt numb and purposeless. He stood erect and vigilant, letting the long, cold barrel slide between his fingers, the hardness of the tree at his back like a second spine. And as he thought of the young man, Another picture crept into his mind again and again, that of a young water buck he had shot last year, lying soft at his feet, its tongue slipping out into the dust as he picked it up, so newly dead that he imagined he felt the blood still pulsing under the warm skin. And from the small wet place under its neck, a few sticky drops rolled over glistening fur. Suddenly, as he stood there thinking of the blood and the limp body of the buck, and the young man laughing with his wife, his mind grew clear and cool, and the oppression on him lifted. He sighed deeply and picked up the rifle again, holding it close, like a friend against him, while he gazed in through the trees at the compound. It was early, and the flush from sunset had not quite yet gone from the sky, although where he stood among the undergrowth, it was night. In the clear spaces between the huts, of groups of figures took shape, talking and laughing and getting ready for the dance. Small cooking fires were being lit, and a big central fire blazed, sending up the showers of sparks into the clouds of smoke. The tom-toms were beating softly, and soon the dance would begin. Visitors' smiles were coming in through the bush from other compounds miles away. It would be a long wait. 3 times he heard the steps along the path close to him before he drew back and turned his head to watch the young man pass, as he had passed every night that week, with a jaunty, eager tread and eyes directed towards Jonas' hut. Jonas stood as quiet as a tree struck by lightning, holding his breath, although he could not be seen because the thick shadows from the trees were black around him. He watched the young man thread his way through the huts into the circle of firelight and pass cautiously to one side of the groups of waiting people, like someone uncertain of his welcome, before going in through the door of his own hut. Hours passed, and he watched the leaping, dancing people and listened to the drums as the stars swung over his head and the night birds talked in the bush around him. He thought steadily now, as he had not previously allowed himself to think, of what was happening inside the small, dark hut that gradually became invisible as the fires died and the dancers went to their blankets. When the moon was small and high and cold behind his back, and the trees threw sharp black windows on the path, and he could smell morning on the wind, he saw the young man coming towards him again. Now Jonas shifted his feet a little to ease the stiffness out of them and moved the rifle along his arm, feeling for the curve of the trigger on his finger. As the young man lurched past, for he was tired, and moved carelessly, Jonas slipped out into the smooth, dusty path a few paces behind, shrinking back as the released branches swung into his face, scattered large drops of dew onto his legs. It was cold. His breath misted into a thick, pearly stream dissolving into the moonlight. He was so close to the man in front, he could have touched him with a raised rifle. Had he turned, there would have been no concealment. But Jonas walked confidently, though carefully, and thought all the time of how he had shot down from 10 paces away that swift young buck as it started with a crash out of a bush into a cold, moony field. When they reached the edge of the land where the acre mealies sloped away, dimly green under the dome of stars, Jonas began to walk like a cat. He wanted now to be sure, and he was only 50 yards from the shooting platform in the corner of the field that looked in this light like a crazy fowl house on stilts. The young man was staggering with tiredness and drink, making a crashing noise at each step as he snapped the sap-full mealies under heavy feet. But the buck had shot like a spear from the bush, had caught the lead in its chest as it leaped, had fallen as a spear curves to earth. It had not blundered and lurched and swayed. Jonas began to feel a disgust for this man, and the admiration and fascination he felt for this young rival vanished. The tall, slim youth who had laughed at his wife had nothing to do with the ungainly figure crashing along before him, making so much noise that there could be no game left unstartled for miles. When they reached the shooting platform, Jonas stopped dead and let the youth move on. He lifted the rifle to his cheek and saw the long barrel slant against the stars, which sent a glint of light back down the steel. He waited, quite still, watching the man's back sway above the mealy's. Then, at the right moment, he squeezed his finger close, holding the rifle steady to fire again. As the sound of the shot reverberated, the round, dark head jerked oddly, blotting out fields of stars. The body seemed to crouch. One hand went out as if it were going to lean sideways to the ground. Then he disappeared into the mealy's with a startled, thick cry. Jonas lowered the rifle and listened. There was a threshing noise, a horrible grunting, and half words muttered, like someone talking in sleep. Jonas picked his way along the rows, feeling the sharp leaf edges scything his legs until he stood above the body that now jerked softly among the stems. He waited until it stilled, then bent to look, parting the chilled moon-green leaves so that he could see clearly. It was no clean, small hole. Raw flesh gaped. Blood poured black to the earth. The limbs were huddled together, shapeless and without beauty. The face was pressed into the soil. "A pig," said Jonas aloud to the listening moon as he kicked the side gently with his foot. "Nothing but a pig." He wanted to hear how it would sound when he said it again, telling how he had shot blind into the grunting, invisible herd.
Hello, I'm back. I'm Gaylie Bell-Stewart, and I'm going to be reading A Modest Proposal by David Sedaris. London is 5 hours ahead of Washington, D.C., except when it comes to gay marriage. In that case, it's 2 years and 5 hours ahead, which was news to me. "Really?" I said, on meeting 2 lesbian wives from Wolverhampton. "You can do that here?" "Well, of course they can," Hugh said when I told him about it. "Where have you been?" Hugh can tell you everything about the current political situation in the UK. He knows who the Chancellor of the Exchequer is and was all caught up in the latest election for the, whatever you call it, that king-type person who's like the president but isn't. "Prime Minister," he said. "Jesus, you've been here how long?" It was the same when we lived in Paris. Hugh regularly read the French papers. He listened to political shows on the radio, while I was like, "Is he the same emperor we had last year?" When it comes to American politics, our roles are reversed. "What do you mean, who's Claire McCaskill?" I'll say, amazed that anyone, for that matter, could have such an ignorant boyfriend. I knew that the Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage was expected at 10 a.m. on June 26, which is 3 p.m. in Sussex. I'm usually out then on my litter patrol, so I made it a point to bring my iPad with me. When the time came, I was standing by the side of the road collecting trash with my grabber. It's generally the same crap over and over. Potato chip bags, candy wrappers, Red Bull cans. But along this particular stretch, 6 months earlier, I'd come across a strap-on penis. It seemed pretty old and was Band-Aid colored, about 3 inches long and not much bigger around than a Vienna sausage, which was interesting to me. You'd think that if someone wanted a sex toy, she'd go for the gold size-wise. But this was just the bare minimum, like getting AAA breast implants. Who had this person been hoping to satisfy? Her Cabbage Patch doll? I thought about taking the penis home and mailing it to one of my sisters for Christmas. But I knew that the moment I put it in my knapsack, I'd get hit by a car and killed. That's just my luck. Medics would come and scrape me off the pavement then. Later at the hospital, they'd rifle through my pack and record its contents. 4 garbage bags, some wet wipes, 2 flashlights, and a strap-on penis. There must be some mistake, Hugh would tell them. You said it was how big? My iPad could get no signal at 3 p.m., so I continued walking and picking up trash, thinking that whichever way the Supreme Court went, I never expected to see this day in my lifetime. When I was young, in the early 70s, being gay felt like the worst thing that could happen to a person, at least in Raleigh, North Carolina. There was a rumor that it could be cured by psychiatrists. So for most of my teens, that's where I placed my hope. I figured that eventually I'd tell my mother and let her take the appropriate steps. What would kill me would be seeing the disappointment on her face. With my father, I was used to it. That was the expression he naturally assumed when looking at me. Her, though. Once, when I was in high school, she caught me doing something or other, imitating my Spanish teacher, perhaps with a pair of tights on my head, and said something like someone at the end of her rope. What are you, a queer? I'd been called a sissy before, not by her, but by plenty of other people. That was different, as the word was less potent, something used by children. When my mother called me a queer, my face turned scarlet and I exploded. Me? What are you talking about? Why would you even say a thing like that? And then I ran down to my room, which was spotless. Everything just so. The Gustav Klimt posters on the wall, the cornflower blue vase I'd bought with the money I earned babysitting. The veil had been lifted, and now I saw this for what it was, the lair of a blatant homosexual. That would have been as good a time as any to say, yes, you're right, get me some help. But I was still hoping that it might be a phase, that I'd wake up the next day and be normal. In the best of times, it seemed like such a short leap. I did fantasize about having a girlfriend, never the sex part. But the rest of it, I had down. I knew what she'd look like, and how she'd hold her long hair back from the flame when bending over a lit candle. I imagined us getting married the summer after I graduated from college. And then I imagined her drowning off the coast of North Carolina during one of my family's vacations. Everyone needed to be there so they could see just how devastated I was. I could actually make myself cry by picturing it. How I'd carry her out of the water, how my feet would sink into the sand owing to the extra weight. I'd try mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and keep trying until someone, my father most often, would pull me back, saying, "It's too late, son. Can't you see she's gone?" It seemed I wanted to marry just so I could be a widower. So profound would be my grief that I'd never look at another woman again. It was perfect, really. Oh, there were variations. Sometimes she'd die of leukemia, like in the movie Love Story. Occasionally, a madman's bullet would fell her during a hostage situation, but always I'd be at her side, trying everything in my power to bring her back. The fantasy remained active until I was 20. Funny how unimportant being gay became once I told somebody. All I had to do was open up to my best friend, and when she accepted it, I saw that I could as well. "I just don't see why you have to rub everybody's noses in it," certain people would complain when I told them. Well, not that I wore it on t-shirts or anything. I'd just say boyfriend, the way they said wife or girlfriend or better half. I insisted that it was no different, and in time, at least in the circles I ran in, it became no different. While I often dreamed of making a life with another man, I never extended the fantasy to marriage or even to civil partnerships, which became legal in France in 1999, shortly after Hugh and I moved to Paris. We'd been together for 8 years by that point, and though I didn't want to break up or look for anyone else, I didn't need the government to validate my relationship. I felt the same way when a handful of American states legalized the same-sex marriage, only more so. I didn't need a government or a church giving me its blessings. The whole thing felt like a step down to me. From the dawn of time, the one irrefutable good thing about gay men and lesbians was that we didn't force people to sit through our weddings. Even the most ardent of homophobes had to hand us that. We were the ones who toiled behind the scenes while straight people got married. The photographers, the bakers, the florists, working like Negro porters settling spoiled passengers into the whites-only section of the train. "Oh, Christopher," a bride might sigh as her dressmaker zipped her up, "what would I have ever done without you?" What saved this from being tragic was that they were doing something we wouldn't dream of, guilt-tripping friends and relatives into giving up their weekends so they could sit on hard church pews or folding chairs in August, listening as the couple mewled vows at each other, watching as they were force-fed cake, standing on the sidelines, bored and sweating, as the pair danced, misty-eyed, to a foreigner song. The battle for gay marriage was, in essence, the fight to be as square as straight people, to say things like, "My husband tells me that the new spicy Chipotle burger they've got over at Bennigan's is awesome." That said, I was all for the struggle, mainly because it was so irritated the fundamentalists. I wanted gay people to get the right to marry, and then I wanted none of us to act on it. I wanted it to be ours to spit on. Instead, much to my disappointment, we seemed to be all over it. I finally got a signal at the post office in the neighboring village. I'd gone to mail a set of keys to a friend, and afterward I went out front and pulled out my iPad. The touch of a finger, and there it was, the headline story on the New York Times site. "Supreme Court ruling makes same-sex marriage a right nationwide." I read it, and probably like every American gay person, I was overcome with emotion. Standing on the sidewalk, dressed in rags, with a litter picker pinion between my legs, I felt my eyes tear up, and as my vision blurred, I considered all the people who had fought against this and thought, "Take that, assholes." The Supreme Court ruling tells every gay 15-year-old living out in the middle of nowhere that he or she is as good as any other dope who wants to get married. To me, it was a slightly mixed message, like saying we're all equally entitled to wear Dockers to the Olive Garden. Then I spoke to my accountant, who's as straight as they come, and he couldn't have been more excited. "For tax purposes, you and Hugh really need to act on this," he told me. "But I don't want to," I said. "I don't believe in marriage." He launched into a little speech. "And here's the thing about legally defined couples. They save boatloads of money, especially when it comes to inheriting property. My accountant told me how much we had to gain, and I was like, is there a waiting period? What documents do I have to sign?" That night, I proposed for the first of what eventually numbered 18 times. "Listen," I said to Hugh over dinner, "we really need to do this. Otherwise, when one of us dies, the other one will be clobbered with taxes." "I don't care," he told me. "It's just money." This is a sentence that does not register on Greek ears. It's just a mango-sized brain tumor. It's just the person I hired to smother you in your sleep. But since when is money just money? "I'm not marrying you," he repeated. I swore to him that I was not being romantic about it. "There'll be no rings, no ceremony, no celebration of any kind. We won't tell anyone but the accountant. Think of it as a financial contract, nothing more." "No." "God damn it," I said. "You are going to marry me whether you like it or not." "No, I'm not." "Oh, yes, you are." After 2 weeks of this, he slammed his fork on the table, saying, "I'll do anything just to shut you up." This is, I'm pretty sure, the closest I'm going to get to a yes. I took another ear of corn. Fine, then. It's settled. It wasn't until the following day that reality set in. I was out on the side of the busy road with my litter picker, collecting the shreds of a paper coffee cup that had been run over by a lawnmower, when I thought of having to tick the box that says married instead of single. I always thought there should have been another option. As for the past 24 years, I've been happily neither. I would never introduce Hugh as my husband, nor would he refer to me that way. But I can easily imagine other people doing it. They'd be the type who so readily embraced partner when it came down the pike in the mid-90s. Well-meaning people, the kind who wear bike helmets. It occurred to me while standing there, cars whizzing by, that the day I marry is the day I'll get hit and killed, probably by some driver who's texting, or likelier still, sexting. "He is survived by his husband, Hugh Hamrick," the obituary will read, "and before I'm even in my grave, I'll be rolling over in it." That night at dinner, neither of us mentioned the previous evening's conversation. We talked about this and that, our little projects, the lives of our neighbors, and then we retreated to different parts of the house. Engaged, I suppose, our whole lives ahead of us. Thank you.
How's everybody? Good? Okay. We're all so happy to be here, and we're so happy to have you here. My name is Sandra Rockman, and I have been so blessed to have been asked to read this story tonight, and this afternoon, actually, and I hope you enjoy it. This is Grandmother's Nose by Robert Couver. She had only just begun to think about the world around her. Until this summer, she and the world had been much the same thing, a sweet, seamless blur of life in life. But now it had broken away from her and become not herself, but the place herself resided in, a sometimes strange and ominous other that must be, for one's own sake, studied, be read like a book, like the books she'd begun to read at the same time the world receded. Or maybe it was her reading that had made the world step back. Things that had once been alive and talked to her because part of her, doll, house, cloud, well, were silent now and apart. And things that lived still on their own, flower, butterfly, mother, grandmother, she now knew also died, another kind of distance. This dying saddened her, though she understood it but dimly. It had little to do with her, only with the inconstant world she lived in, and it caused her to feel sorry for these ill-fated things. She used to think it was funny when her mother chopped the head off a chicken and it ran crazily around the garden. Now, she didn't. She no longer squashed ants and beetles underfoot or pulled the wings off flies and butterflies, and she watched old things precious to her, like her mother, with some anxiety, frightened by the possibility of their sudden absence. Since dying was a bad thing, she associated it with being bad, and so was good, at least as good as she could be. She wanted to keep her mother with her. If her mother asked her to do something, she did it, which was why she was here. She also associated dying with silence, for that was what it seemed to come to. So she chattered and sang the day through to chase the silence away. A futile endeavor, she knew. She somehow had this knowledge. Perhaps it was something her grandmother taught her or showed her in a book, but she kept it up during her small part to hold back the ends of things, cheerfully conversing with any creature who would stop to talk with her. This brought smiles to most faces. She was their little heroine. Though her mother sometimes scolded her, "Don't speak with strangers," she would say. Well, the whole world was somewhat strange to her, even her mother sometimes. It was talk to it or let the fearful stillness reign. Though the world was less easy to live in than before, it was more intriguing. She looked at things more closely than she had when looking at the world was like looking in at herself, her eyes, then liquid mirrors in a liquid world, now more like windows. She poised behind them, staring out big with purpose. To be at one with things was once enough. Sameness, then, a comfort, like a fragrant kitchen or a warm bath. Now it was difference that gave her pleasure. Feathers, she had no feathers. Petals, wrinkles, shells. Water's murmuring trickles over stones, not one alike. Her mother's teeth, she hadn't even seen them there in her mouth before. The way a door is made, and steps, and shoes. She thought about words like dog, log, and fog, and how unlike these things were that sounded so like cousins. And she peered intensely at everything, seeking out the mystery in the busyness of ants, the odd, veiny shape of leaves, the way fire burned, the skins of things. And now it was her grandmother's nose. It was a hideous thing to see, but for that reason alone aroused her curiosity. It was much longer and darker than she remembered, creased and hairy and swollen with her illness. She knew she ought not to stare at it, poor Grandma, but fascination gripped her. Such a nose. It was as if some creature had got inside her grandmother's face and was trying to get out. She wished to touch the nose to see if it were true or cold or warm. Grandma lay so still it was frightening. She touched her own nose instead. Yes, dying, she thought, though her own nose, remembered, must be a horrible thing. The rest of Grandma had been affected too. Though she was mostly covered up under nightcap gown and heaped up bedclothes as though perhaps to hide the shame of her disease, it was clear from what she glimpsed that the dark, hairy swelling had spread to other parts. And she longed, not without a little bit of dread, to see them, to know better what dying was like. But what could not be hidden was the nose, a dark, bristly outcropping poking out of the downy bedding like the toe of a dirty black boot from a cloud bank or from snow. Plain, as her grandmother liked to say, as the nose on your face. Only a soft snort betrayed the life still in it. Grandma also liked to say that the nose was invented for old people to hang their spectacles on. Grandma's spectacles were on the table beside her bed, perched on a closed book. But the truth was, eyes were probably invented to show the nose where to go. The nose sat in the very middle of one's face for all to see, no matter how old one was, and it led the way first to go wherever the rest went, pointing the direction. When she complained that she'd forgotten the way to Grandma's house, her mother had said, "Oh, just follow your nose." And she had done that, and here she was, nose to nose with Grandma. Her grandmother opened one rheumy eye under the frill of her nightcap and stared gloomily at her, as though not quite recognizing her. She backed away. She really didn't know what to do. It was very quiet. Perhaps she should sing a song? "I brought you some biscuits and butter, Grandma," she said at last, her voice a timid whisper. Her grandmother closed her eye again, and from under her nose let loose a deep, growly A nose was also for smelling things, and Grandma did not smell very nice. "On the way, I also picked some herbs for tea. Shall I put some on? Tea might do you good." "No, just set those things on the table, little girl," her grandmother said without opening her lidded eye, "and come get into bed with me." Her voice was hoarse and raw. Maybe it was bad cold she was dying of. "I'd rather not, Grandma." She didn't want to hurt her grandmother's feelings, but she did not want to get close to her either, not the way she looked and smelled. She seemed to be scratching herself under the bedding. "It's not time for bed." Her grandmother opened her near eye again and studied her a minute before emitting a mournful grunt and closing it again. "All right then," she mumbled. "Forget it. Do as you damn well please." Oh dear, she'd hurt her feelings anyway. Her grandmother burped sorely again, and a big red tongue flopped out below her swollen nose and dangled like a dry rag on a line, or her own cap hanging there. "I'm sorry, Grandma. It's just that it scares me the way you look now." However I look, she groaned, it can't be half so bad as how I feel. Her grandmother gaped her mouth hugely and ran her long, dry tongue around the edges. It must have been something I ate. She felt an urge to remark on her grandmother's big, toothy mouth, which was quite shocking to see when it opened all the way, so unlike her mother's mouth, but thought better of it. It would just make her grandmother even sadder. She'd said too much already, and once she started to ask questions, the list could get pretty long, not counting the parts she couldn't see. She remembered a story her grandmother told her about a little boy who was born with donkey ears. And all the rest was donkey too. It was a sad story that ended happily when the donkey boy got into bed with a princess. She began to regret not having crawled into bed with her poor grandmother when she begged it of her. If she asked again, she would do it. Hold her breath and do it. Isn't there some way I can help, Grandma? The only thing you're good for, child, would just make things worse. Her grandmother lapped at her nose with her long tongue, making an ominous scratchy sound. Oof! I'm really not feeling well. I'm sorry. And so you should be. It's your fault, you know. Oh, was it something I brought that made you sick? No, she said crossly, but you led me to it. Did I? I didn't mean to. Bah! Innocence. I eat up innocence. Grandma gnashed her teeth and another rumble rolled up from deep inside and escaped her. When I'm able to eat anything at all. She opened her eye and squinted it at her. What big eyes you have, young lady. What are you staring at? Your nose, Grandma. What's the matter with it? Her grandmother reached one hand out from under the bedding to touch it. Her hand was black and hairy like her nose, and her fingernails had curled to ugly claws. Oh, it's a very nice nose, but it's so... Are you dying, Grandma? She blurted out at last. There was a grumpy pause, filled only with a or two. Then her grandmother sighed morosely and grunted. Looks like it. Yeah, worse luck. Not what I had in mind at all. She turned her head to scowl at her with both dark eyes, the frill of the nightcap down over her thick brows, giving her a clownish, cross-eyed look. She had to smile. She couldn't help herself. Hey, smarty pants, what's funny? You're going to die too, you know. You're not getting out of this. I suppose so, but not now. Her grandmother glared at her for a moment quite ferociously, then turned her head away and closed her eyes once more. No, she said, not now. And she lapped scratchily at her nose again. In a story she'd read in a book, there was a woman whose nose got turned into a long blood sausage because of a bad wish, and the way her grandmother tongued her black nose made her think of it. Did her grandmother wish for something she shouldn't have? I sort of know what dying is, Grandma. I had a bird with a broken wing and it died and turned cold and didn't do anything after that. And living, well, that's like every day. Mostly I like it. But what's the point if you just have to die and not be and forget everything? How should I know what the damn point is? Her grandmother growled. She lay there in a heaped bedding, nose high, her red tongue dangling once more below it. She didn't move. It was very quiet. Was she already dead? Or just thinking? Appetite, her grandmother said, finally breaking the silence. And the end of appetite. That's it. That was more like the grandma she knew. She had lots of stories about being hungry or about eating too much or the wrong things, like the one about the little girl whose father ate her brother. She liked the dish. He liked the dish so much, he sucked every bone. Now, every time she ate a chicken wing, she thought of that father. The little girl gathered all the bones he threw onto the table and put them together, and her brother became a boy again. Grandma often told stories about naughty boys and cruel fathers, but the little boy in this story was nice, and the father was quite nice too, even if he did sometimes eat children. Her grandmother popped her eye open suddenly and barked in her deep, raspy voice, "Don't look so closely." It scared her and made her jump back. She had been leaning in, trying to see the color of the skin under the black hairs. It was a color, something like old driftwood. "Look too closely at anything," her grandmother said, letting the dark lid fall over her eye once more and tilting her nose toward the ceiling, "and what you'll see is nothing, and then you'll see it everywhere. You won't be able to see anything else." She gaped her jaws and burped grandly. "Big mistake," she growled. The thing about her grandmother's nose, so different from her own or from anyone she knew, she thought as she put the kettle on for tea, was that it seemed to say so much more to her than her grandmother did. Her nose was big and rough, but at the same time it looked so naked and sad and kind of embarrassing. She couldn't figure out exactly what she thought about it. Grandma's talk was blunt and plain and meant just what it said, no more. The nose was more mysterious and seemed to be saying several things to her at once. It was like reading a story about putting a brother back together with his licked bones and discovering later it was really about squashing bad ladies, one meaning hidden under another, like bugs under a stone. With a pestle, she ground some of the herbs she brought in a mortar, then climbed up on a chair to get a cup down from the cupboard. Her grandmother's nose was both funny and frightening at the same time, and hinted at worlds beyond her imagination. Worlds maybe she didn't really want to live in. "If you die, Grandma," she said, crawling down from the chair, "I'll save all your bones." "To chew on, I hope," her grandmother snapped, sinking deeper into the bedding. "Which reminds me," she added somewhat more lugubriously, "one thing your grandmother said, as I now recall, was, 'Don't bite off more than you can chew.'" "Yes, but you're my grandmother." "That's right. Well, don't forget it. Now go away. Leave me alone before I bite your head off just to shut you up." This dying was surely a hard thing that her grandmother was going through. One had to expect a little bad temper. Even her grandmother's nose seemed grayer than it had been before, her tongue more rag-like in its lifeless dangle, her stomach rumblings more dangerously eruptive. It was as though she had some wild, angry beast inside her. It made her shudder. Dying was definitely not something to look forward to. The kettle was boiling, so she scraped the mortar grindings into the cup and filled it full of hot water, put the cup on the table beside the bed. "Here, Grandma, this will make you feel better." Her grandmother only snarled peevishly. Later, when she got home, her mother asked her how Grandma was feeling. "Not very well," she said. "A wolf had eaten her and got into bed in Grandma's nightclothes, and he asked me to get in bed with him." "Did you do that?" "No, I sort of wanted to, but then some men came in and chopped the wolf's head off and cut his tummy open to get Grandma out again. I didn't stay, but I think Grandma was pretty upset." Her mother smiled, showing her teeth, and told her it was time for bed. Was that what really happened? Maybe, maybe not. She wasn't sure. But it was a way of remembering it, even if it was perhaps not the best way to remember poor Grandma. That nose. Though Grandma was dying or was already dead, so it didn't really matter. She crawled into her bed, a place not so friendly as it once was, but first she touched her bedstead, the book beside it. Grandma had given it to her. Her pillow, doll, felt the floorboards under her feet, convincing herself of the reality of all that, because some things today had caused her doubt. No sooner had her feet left the floor, however, than there was nothing left of that sensation except her memory of it, and that she knew would soon be gone, and the memory of her grandmother too, and someday the memory of her. And she knew then that her grandmother's warning about the way she looked at things had come too late. Thank you.
Thank you guys for being here today. This is the last story. I'm Kimberly Ewing, and I'm going to be reading Powder from Tobias Wolff. Just before Christmas, my father took me skiing at Mount Baker. He'd had a fight for the privilege of my company because my mother was still angry with him for sneaking me into a nightclub during our last visit to see Thelonious Monk. He wouldn't give up. He promised, hand on heart, to take good care of me and have me home for dinner on Christmas Eve. And she relented. But as we were checking out of the lodge that morning, it began to snow. And in this snow, he observed some quality that made it necessary for us to get one last run. We got in several runs. He was indifferent to my fretting. Snow whirled around us in bitter, blinding squalls, hissing like sand, and still we skied. As the lift bore us to the peak yet again, my father looked at his watch and said, "Criminy, this'll have to be a fast one." By now, I couldn't see the trail. It was snowing so hard. There was no point in trying. I stuck to him like white on rice and did what he did and somehow made it to the bottom without sailing off a cliff. We returned our skis and my father put chains on the Austin Healey while I swayed from foot to foot, clapping my mittens and wishing I were home. I could see everything. The green tablecloth, the plates with the holly pattern, the red candles waiting to be lit. It was Christmas Eve. We passed a diner on our way out. "You want some soup?" my father asked. I shook my head. "Buck up," he said. "I'll get you there. Right, doctor?" I was supposed to say, "Right, doctor," but I didn't say anything. A state trooper waved us down outside the resort. A pair of sawhorses were blocking the road. The trooper came up to our car and bent down to my father's window. His face was bleached by the cold. Snowflakes clung to his eyebrows and to the fur trim of his jacket and cap. "Don't tell me," my father said. The trooper told him. The road was closed. It might be cleared, it might not. Storm took everyone by surprise. So much, so fast. Hard to get people moving. Christmas Eve, you know. What can you do? My father said, "Now look, we're talking about 4 or 5 inches. I've taken this car through worse than that." The trooper straightened up, boots creaking. His face was out of sight, but I could hear him clearly. "The road is closed." My father sat with both hands on the wheel, rubbing the wood with his thumbs. He looked at the barricade for a long time. He seemed to be trying to master the idea of it. Then he thanked the trooper, and with a weird old matey show of caution, he turned the car around. "Your mother will never forgive me for this," he said. "We should have left before," I said. "Doctor." He didn't speak to me again until we were both in a booth at the diner waiting for our burgers. "She won't forgive me," he said. "Do you understand? Never." "I guess," I said, but no guesswork was required. She wouldn't forgive him. "Well, I can't let that happen." He bent toward me. "I'll tell you what I want. I want us to be together again. Is that what you want?" I wasn't sure, but I said, "Yes, sir." He bumped my chin with his knuckles. That's all I needed to hear. When we finished eating, he went to the payphone in the back of the diner and then joined me in the booth again. I figured he'd called my mother, but he didn't give a report. He sipped at his coffee and stared out the window at the empty road. "Come on." When the trooper's car went past, lights flashing, he got up and dropped some money on the check. "Okay, vámonos." The wind had died, and the snow was falling straight down. Less of it now, lighter. We drove away from the resort right up to the barricade. "Move it," my father told me. And when I looked at him, he said, "What are you waiting for?" I got out and I dragged one of the sawhorses aside and then pushed it back after he drove through. When I got inside the car, he said, "Now you're an accomplice. We go down together." He put the car in gear and looked at me. "Joke, doctor," he said. "Funny, doctor," I said back. Down the first long stretch, I watched the road behind us to see if the trooper was on our tail. The barricade vanished. Then there was nothing but snow. Snow on the road, snow kicking up from the chains, snow on the trees, snow in the sky, and our trail in the snow. I faced around and had a shock. The lie of the road behind us had been marked by our own tracks, but there were no tracks ahead of us. My father was breaking virgin snow between a line of tall trees. He was humming "Stars Fell on Alabama." I felt snow brush along the floorboards under my feet. To keep my hands from shaking, I clamped them between my knees. My father grunted in a thoughtful way and said, "Don't ever try this yourself." "I won't," I said. "That's what you say now, but someday you'll get your license and then you'll think you can do anything, son. Only you won't be able to do this. You know, I don't know. You need to have a certain instinct." "Well, maybe I have it." "You don't. You have your strong points, yes, but not, you know. I only mention it because I don't want to give you the idea that this is something that just anybody can do. I'm a great driver. That's not a virtue, okay? It's just a fact, and one you should be aware of. Of course, you have to give the old heap some credit, too. There aren't many cars I'd try this with. Listen." I listened. I heard the slap of the chains, the stiff, jerky rasp of the wipers, the purr of the engine. It really did purr. The car was almost new. My father couldn't afford it and kept promising to sell it, but here it was. I said, "Where do you think the policeman went to?" "Are you warm enough?" He reached over and cranked up the blower. Then he turned off the wipers. We didn't need them. The clouds had just started to brighten. A few sparse, feathery flakes drifted into our slipstream and were swept away. We left the trees and entered a broad field of snow that ran level for a while and then tilted sharply downward. Orange stakes had been planted at intervals in 2 parallel lines, and my father ran a course between them, though they were far enough apart to leave considerable doubt in my mind as to where exactly the road lay. He was humming again, doing little scat riffs around the melody. Well, okay then, what are my strong points? Don't get me started, he said. It'll take all day. Oh, right. Name one. Easy. You always think ahead. True. I always thought ahead. I was a boy who caught his clothes. I kept my clothes on numbered hangers to ensure proper rotation. I bothered my teachers for homework assignments far ahead of their due dates so I could make up schedules. I thought ahead, and that was why I knew that there would be other troopers waiting for us at the end of our ride, if we got there. What I did not know was that my father would wheedle and plead his way past them. He didn't sing O Tannenbaum, but just about. And he did get me home for dinner, buying a little more time before my mother decided to make the split final. I knew we'd get caught. I was resigned to it. And maybe for this reason, I stopped moping and began to enjoy myself. Why not? This one was for the books, like being in a speedboat, only better. You can't go downhill in a boat, and it was all ours. And it kept coming, the laden trees, the unbroken surface of snow, the sudden white vistas. Here and there I saw hints of the road, ditches, fences, stakes, but not so many that I could have found my way. But then I didn't have to. My father, in his 48th year, rumpled, kind, bankrupt of honor, flushed with certainty. He was a great driver. All persuasion, no coercion. Such subtlety at the wheel, such tactful pedal work. I actually trusted him. And the best was yet to come. Switchbacks and hairpins, impossible to describe. Except maybe to say this. If you haven't driven fresh powder, you haven't driven. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming this afternoon. There's a little bittersweet aspect of this, which is that for 27 years, Gaylie Bell has been with Tim O'Connor Reader Theater for 20 years. And before Tim passed, he asked her specifically to continue with the tradition which she has done for the last 7 years, and we are all benefiting from it. I know that I don't do much theater outside of this, and this is just the right amount for me. But I will say that we are incredibly grateful for Gaylie Bell's determination, patience, willingness to read all these stories until she finds some stories that are worthy of you as an audience and us as presenters. And we just want to say thank you very much. This will be the last Readers Theater under Gaylie Bell-Stewart's direction. We'll see if it gets picked up by somebody else. But you are here for the last one. Congratulations.